You don't wake up one day and realize you're in a toxic relationship. That's not how it happens. It starts quietly. You think you're in love. You think they care. You think you're building something special. But one day you find yourself hesitating before speaking. You double-check what you wear. You replay conversations in your head, afraid you said something wrong. And slowly, without noticing, you become smaller inside the relationship than you ever were outside of it. That's how toxic control begins. Not with a slap, not with shouting, but with silence. Let's talk about how this happens, because it doesn't start where you'd expect. In the beginning, it feels beautiful. They might make you feel like you're the center of their universe. They text all day, want to be around you constantly, and say things like, "I've never felt this way about anyone before." And you believe it. Why wouldn't you? It feels amazing. But here's the thing. Not all intensity is love. Sometimes, intensity is just control in disguise, dressed up as passion. At first, the boundaries blur. You stop talking to certain friends because they make your partner uncomfortable. You stop wearing certain clothes because they don't like the attention you get. You start second-guessing your instincts, your needs, your truth. And it happens so slowly that you don't recognize it as a pattern. I remember something a woman once shared in a workshop. Her name was Lisa. She was in her mid-30s and told us this story that stuck with me ever since. She said, "He never raised his voice, not once, but I still stopped laughing at things he didn't find funny. I stopped going to the gym because he said it was full of the wrong type of people. I stopped visiting my mum because every time I did, he got in a bad mood for days. He never said, 'Don't go,' but I knew what would happen if I did." That's the thing. Toxic control doesn't always show up with violence or screaming. It shows up in the space you slowly give away without being asked to, in the emotional consequences you learn to avoid, and in the fear that loving someone might mean losing yourself. Once that quiet control becomes part of your daily life, something deeper starts to happen, something more dangerous. You begin to question your own perception. You feel anxious, but you tell yourself you're overreacting. You feel misunderstood, but you convince yourself you're just being too sensitive. You start apologizing for things you don't even understand. This is what emotional erosion looks like. Not an explosion, but the slow breakdown of your identity. You don't fight back. You don't walk away, because in your mind you still love them. And love is supposed to be about compromise, right? But here's what nobody teaches us early on. Love that costs you your voice is not love. Love that shrinks you is not love. Love that punishes you for being fully yourself is not love. Here's a metaphor that might help. Imagine you're holding a glass of clean, clear water. That's you, pure, whole, honest. Now someone drops a single drop of ink into it. You barely notice. It's still water, just a little tinted. But over time, more drops come, slowly, one after every argument, one after every time you silence your needs, one after every moment you explain away your pain. Eventually, the water isn't water anymore. It's murky, thick with things you never agreed to, and you're still standing there, holding it, trying to remember what it used to look like. This is what people mean when they say, "I lost myself in the relationship." They don't mean it dramatically. They mean it literally. They don't recognize their own reflection anymore, not just in the mirror, but in the way they think, the way they speak, the way they move through the world. And by the time you realize how much you've changed, you've also internalized the idea that this is what it takes to be loved. So you stay, not because you don't see the red flags, but because you think you can manage them, because you've convinced yourself that every relationship has problems, because you don't want to start over, because they weren't always like this, because you love them. But love doesn't mean surrender. This isn't just about recognizing toxic love. It's about rebuilding your relationship with yourself. And I want to give you 3 powerful truths. Not easy steps, but real ones. The kind that move the needle when you feel stuck. If you feel smaller in your relationship than you did before it, that's not love. That's conditioning. Start observing yourself, not just your partner. Notice how you speak around them. Notice the thoughts that come before you express yourself. If you edit who you are for peace, you're not in peace. You're in fear. You're allowed to outgrow the version of you that tolerated what you now see. Forgive yourself. You're not weak for staying. You were trying. You were hopeful. That's not shameful. That's human. But hope becomes a trap when it keeps you chained to something that's draining your spirit. You don't need permission to choose yourself. You can leave without having a perfect explanation. You can walk away just because your peace matters more than their approval. You can say, "This is no longer love for me," and that's enough. The most dangerous thing about toxic love is that it teaches you to abandon yourself in order to not be abandoned. But the truth is, you already feel alone. You already feel unloved. You already feel like a ghost in your own life. So ask yourself this: if I keep choosing them, who's choosing me? Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do for them and for yourself is leave. Not out of hate, not out of revenge, but out of a deep, quiet decision to return to who you were before you started fading. Sometimes the hardest part isn't leaving. It's admitting that what you called love wasn't. It's looking back at all the moments you ignored your instincts, all the times you defended their behavior, all the times you told your friends, "You just don't know them like I do." You weren't stupid. You weren't weak. You were doing your best with the love you thought you deserved. But now you see it. You see how it started, not with control, but with compliments, not with fear, but with fascination, not with anger, but with attention. That's the trap. That's how toxic love begins. And the only way out is truth, not their truth. Yours. The truth about what you need. The truth about how you feel when you're with them. The truth about how much of yourself you're giving up just to keep the peace. You don't have to make it dramatic. You don't have to make it loud. You just have to make it honest. Because one day, you're going to wake up next to someone who makes you feel safe, not small, heard, not handled, free, not fearful. And when that day comes, you'll be grateful you chose yourself, even when it hurt. That's not the end of love. That's the beginning of it. Here's something nobody tells you. When you leave a toxic relationship, you don't just lose the other person. You also lose the version of yourself that believed you couldn't live without them. And that part hurts, because as much as they broke you down, they also became familiar. The patterns, the cycles, even the chaos became your normal. So when you finally walk away, there's a silence that feels unbearable, not because it's empty, but because it's honest. And sometimes honesty is louder than pain. People will ask, "Why didn't you leave sooner?" They won't understand that toxic love doesn't trap you with chains. It traps you with confusion, with guilt, with just enough good moments to make you question the bad ones.